Good morning, everybody. We'll get started in a minute or two as folks are coming in from the waiting area. We'll get started in about a minute. Well, hello and good morning. This is Bill Schleiser from the Delta Institute, and I want to welcome everybody to our webinar this morning, talking about incorporating soil conservation practices into Michigan farmland appraisal. Really excited for all of you to be with us this morning, and we've got a great agenda for today's webinar. We'll do some quick introductions, talk about the project overall, go in depth into the land valuation process, talk about soil health, and then how we bring it all back together. But then most importantly, we'll be closing down with conversation and Q&A from all of you, the attendees this morning as well. Just a few quick housekeeping items. As you probably got prompted, we are recording this and it will be available on Delta's YouTube channel. We'll send out a link to it after it is posted later this week. We're going to be having everybody on mute, and you can ask questions as they come up in your head, either through the Q&A button that's on your screen or through the chat itself. We'll be monitoring both so that we're ready to answer those questions when we get through the presentation. I might even answer some of them in the chat as we go through. Really looking forward to the discussion today, and just some quick intros. Like I said, I'm Bill Schleiser, CEO of Delta Institute, and I'm joined by Amanda Herzog, who's the Great Lakes Program Officer for the Erb Family Foundation. And then our lead presenters today will be Josh Zuckerman, who leads our resilient agriculture portfolio here at Delta, and Lucas Chamberlain, who's an associate with us here at Delta. But first, I want to pass it over to Amanda.
Great, thank you, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm Amanda Herzog, the Great Lakes Program Officer at the Fred A. and Barbara M. Erb Family Foundation. We're a Great Lakes funder located just north of Detroit and in the greater watershed of Lake Erie. It is a special week here at the foundation. We are marking what would have been Fred Erb's 100th birthday. As a business leader and philanthropist, Fred Erb was driven by his desire to create a better world for current and future generations. He and his wife, Barbara, shared a visionary approach to giving, recognizing that environmental, economic, and societal interests must go hand in hand. And together, their generosity helped advance sustainable business practices, improve the health of the Great Lakes, ensure the vibrancy of the region's cultural treasures, and celebrated Fred's lifelong passion for jazz. Improving water quality is a significant part of our foundation's mission. Our foundation has supported over $22 million in efforts to address urban runoff in the Detroit metropolitan region and in rural areas of Southeast Michigan to keep nutrients such as phosphorus and nitrogen on farm fields instead of in our rivers and lakes. And it's through this grant making that the foundation became aware of the important work that Delta Institute was doing in advancing conservation efforts in agriculture. And we have supported their efforts in creating an economic incentive for adoption of soil health management, which is critical in reducing nutrient loading in Lake Erie.
Thanks, Amanda. And we can't thank Erb Family Foundation enough for the support of our resilient agriculture portfolio currently and into the future. We're really excited about the work that we're able to accomplish with the support that we have from foundations like Erb. And really excited to talk about what Delta is up to and what we're doing here in Michigan. But first off, who is Delta and what do we actually do here at the organization? We, like the Erb Family Foundation, bring together partnerships and collaborations to really focus on those environmental, economic, and community problems to solve them throughout the Midwest on the ground to figure out how to tackle these in innovative ways and really bring through the expertise of those folks on the ground that are experiencing those hardships from climate change and other environmental issues throughout the region. We do this by focusing on land and water and on communities and holding up the amazing partnerships that exist throughout the Midwest and Great Lakes. Erb, like Amanda said, is celebrating 100 years of being around, and we are going to be celebrating a quarter century coming up soon. So stay tuned for that as well. We do our work through initiatives here at Delta, and in those collaborations, we have three major initiative areas. The first being nature-based climate solutions, working with communities on the ground to deal with the impacts of climate change throughout the entire Great Lakes and Midwest, as well as providing technical assistance support through our Sustainability and Support Services initiative. If you want to find out more about those programs, you can go to delta-institute.org. But today we're talking about our resilient agriculture portfolio, which is really focused on solving those economic and environmental issues that farmers face every day, specifically with the acceleration of climate change. How do we center soil health and improve our soil so that we can improve our farms and the economics on those farms? And here at Delta, we have a goal of working directly with 1,000 farmers to start the transition of 1 million acres here in the Midwest and Great Lakes, really understanding how can you create the tools and incentives and the economics to make it worthwhile for farmers to really think about their soil and manage their systems in new and innovative ways, focused on that stewardship that we know farmers really care about on their land. Before we jump in, we want to ask you all where you all are coming from today. So we're going to do a really quick poll so that we can see where folks are from. I love these live results as they just pop up. This is great. So we've got folks from agencies, from nonprofits, from science and researchers, and other. No farmers on the line right now, but I come from a farming family, and we have farmers on staff as well here at Delta. So we do have farmer representatives here today. So let's share those results so folks can see the breakdown, and then I am going to pass it over to our next presenter, who is Josh Zuckerman. Josh, you want to take control?
Thank you. Just clearing out my screen here from that poll. Thanks for joining us today, Bill. Thank you for the great introduction. Amanda, thanks for joining us here today too. This is really great. Today, we're going to describe what we've been doing in our project here. So the way I like to describe this is in an easy nutshell kind of way. If farmer A has healthier soil than farmer B, does that mean that farmer A should have more value to their farm? Is their land worth more? So in doing this, the real goal here is to create an economic incentive to increasing farmland value and having farmers adopt conservation practices. So our need here is improving water quality in the Great Lakes Basin. To do this, we're promoting on-farm strategies that reduce nutrient loading and water runoff and improving soil health. Few Southeastern Michigan farms adopt soil conservation strategies. We've realized that there's little financial incentive to do so. And we want to link soil health to farmland value, and we think it's an incentive for farmers to adopt soil conservation strategies. This is a way that we can enhance profitability and resiliency of our farms. And it's also the effects and benefits of soil conservation are currently not factored into the farmland valuation process. So we want to incorporate this in doing so. Our major project area where we're doing our work, as you can see, there's 7 major watersheds that feed the Great Lake Basin. We're working in Southeastern Michigan, the 4 counties identified on this map here. In our previous scopes of work, we've realized, and we were researching what is the cause for farmers to not necessarily be adopting conservation practices. There's loads of programs out there. we wanted to understand the barriers preventing farmers to do so. And in our research, we've realized that there's unbelievably low adoption of conservation programs in our 4 counties that we're working in, as you can see according to these charts. Nutrient plans are low, buffer filter strips are very low, cover crop adoption is low, and there's low engagement with state conservation programs as well as federal conservation programs. Real quick here, we're going to get into soil health and how soil health improves our waterways. We're going to do a quick poll about soil health and see what our results are. How familiar are we with the concept of soil health? Let's ask this at large to our group. Great, we can see the results here. We've got a lot of people that are familiar. 84% is familiar and 16% are experts. So this is really great. So I'm going to do a quick overview of soil health then, since everyone in the room seems to understand a little bit about it. The most important takeaway for soil health management systems for us right now is that it filters water, removing contaminants from the soil that are put into the soil or in the soil. It stores water, resulting in less runoff from fields. It prevents erosion, which contributes to less sediment deposition into the Great Lakes, into our water systems, as well as it sequesters minerals, keeping toxic compounds out of water and provides nutrients to plants. So really, we can see here a great way to improve our water systems, as well as the Great Lakes Basin, Lake Huron, is by improving soil health. If we can improve soil health, we can improve our waterways. Soil health improves with proper management. This is something that I think, because everyone seems to be familiar with, these are on-farm strategies that reduce soil disturbance. They promote beneficial soil organisms, keep living roots in the soil all year round, and ensuring that soil is covered all year round. Now, all of these things together combined effectively does improve soil health, these practices. Cover crops, minimal soil disturbance, above ground biodiversity, continuous living root systems, most importantly, livestock integration. All of these things, when practiced, improve soil health. And while improving soil health, improves our waterways. Here's an example of reduced tillage. This is a no-till system that has soybean planted into it. You can see the residue of the crop from the last harvest. We have cover crops as a post-harvest. This is a cover crop growing in through a cornfield. Here we have crop biodiversity. This isn't necessarily row crop farming, but you can see here there's multiple plants planted in row crops here. This could be some sort of market garden. It could be a bigger operation. Looks like tomatoes, some Swiss chard, as well as parsley growing here. And then, of course, livestock integration. Here's a great photo from the University of Nebraska of cattle being integrated into a corn system after the corn was harvested to take up whatever residues left, whatever the cows find that they enjoy there, as well as providing fertilizer for the next round of crops. The benefits of soil health cannot be overstated. There's economic as well as environmental benefits. Healthy soils from healthy management systems do reduce inputs and costs, lower risks from weather as a climate resiliency and from pests, and they can produce higher yields and productivity. They also have many environmental benefits. Most importantly for us right now is the improved water quality, preventing runoff, and increasing water penetration into the soils. Something that's really striking as well, not just in our counties that we're focused on, it's really the soil health management strategies in Michigan at large. When we look at about 10 million row crops in the state, conservation practices are at a very low adoption rate. So the point of our project here is, if we can create an economic incentive for farmers to adopt these soil management practices, we might be able to increase these practices through the state. If a farmer does start to practice these implementations, these management systems, and there's currently no incentive financially to do so. There's programs that allow a little bit of funding here, adoption of practices, but as a steward of their land, if farmers over time can improve their soil, we believe there's value to that. And a great way to associate value to that is through the farmland appraisal process. That again, if farmer A does have healthier soil than farmer B, we believe that's something that should be valued in the appraisal, and their land should be worth more money. To continue here, we're going to pass it over to Lucas to describe what we've actually been up to in this project, describing how we're doing our testing as well as the land valuation process. Lucas?
Great. Thank you so much, Josh. And thank you, Amanda, and everyone who's attending today. This is really exciting to talk about our work. Let's see here. Great. So Josh has explained all of the benefits of soil health. We've discussed the management systems that promote soil health on farms, but we also need to think about how to measure soil health. And luckily, recently, the Soil Health Institute has put together a standardized diagnostic criteria for measuring soil health. And actually, I'll return. I think I went, see if I can. There we go. How to measure soil health using diagnostic criteria that are standardized and they are readily measured. The Soil Health Institute recommends 3 soil health indicators. The first being total soil carbon and nitrogen. This gives us an idea of the amount of organic matter in your soil, as well as the crucial plant available nutrient nitrogen. The second is the potential carbon mineralization of your soils. That gives us an idea of the microbial activity in your soil, especially beneficial soil organisms like arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. The final soil health indicator recommended by the Soil Health Institute to measure for soil health is to measure the stability of water-stable soil aggregates. So this gives us an idea of the stability of your soil, its resilience to disturbance like erosion or weathering, as well as its potential to sequester minerals, especially valuable minerals like carbon. And I just want to circle back to previous stages of work that have led us to this point. Delta, with support from the Erb Family Foundation, we looked at our project geography, those 4 southeastern Michigan counties. And we were looking at their adoption of conservation practices that protect or promote soil health and then protect waterways in doing so. And what we found was that across those 4 counties, the adoption of these conservation practices differed in terms of amount of acreage that were being covered by these conservation practices, but also in their enrollment in either state or federal programs that are cost share programs that incentivize farmers to adopt these strategies. So overall, we found that conservation funding is low. The adoption of these soil conservation practices is low. In fact, less than 10% of the farm operations in our project geography, those 4 counties, less than 10% of them were enrolled in any kind of conservation program, which then brought us back to our primary question and our work with the Erb Family Foundation is that how do we promote the adoption of these conservation practices so that we can protect these crucial waterways? We found in further stages of work that simply farmers, landowners, land managers, there's just a lack of financial incentives for them to adopt conservation practices. Moving ahead, trying to identify, well, then what is going to be the best financial incentive for these land owners, land managers, and farmers? We identified with an advisory group that was comprised of soil conservation scientists, as well as agricultural real estate folks, that the greatest opportunity is to connect soil health to land value. And our project geography, those 4 southeastern Michigan counties, are uniquely poised to be a kind of a pilot area for us to test this hypothesis, because the majority of farmers in this area are owners and operators. So not only do they have a stake in the value of their land, but they're also the primary managers of their land and can make these management decisions. We also found that farm operations in this area are expanding in terms of acreage. Crop land value in this project area is higher. The price per acre is higher than the state average. So we have high value cropland here. And of course, as I'm sure many people are familiar, that since 2017, the value of cropland has consistently been increasing. And I should mention that, as I mentioned, the advisory group that has helped us and informed these previous stages of work include Matthew Gommans and Sungmin Chu from Michigan State University, and they researchers there. They've been crucial to our past stages and current and future work. Let's see if I can. Great. So before we dive into land valuation, we want to see one final poll here. We want to see what your familiarity with agricultural real estate is. We've already talked about soil health, but we want to now get more into the details of agricultural real estate. So I will launch this poll, and feel free to submit your answer here. The results are pouring in. I'll share here. Looks like we have a 50-50 split. Some folks are not very familiar with agricultural real estate, and some are, so that's great. Why don't we, I'll stop sharing that. So let's just dive in a little bit to the land valuation process, especially in Michigan, because each state is different. But thanks to collaborators, again, in our advisory group that included folks from the real estate industry, we've learned really that there are two primary approaches to farmland valuation. The first being income capitalization. And this very simply applies, or the concept is that the present value of your land is equal to its future income that is discounted by certain factors. But really, we see that the future income streams, such as your ability to lease land to tenant farmers or your ability to sell commodities, those represent your income streams, and that those may represent your present value of land. So in this approach, we see that soil productivity is valuable. And in Michigan, soil productivity is measured using a productivity index that gives a number between 0 and 100. Across Michigan, we saw that the productivity index, the average productivity index, is around 41. But this is problematic for our work and our desire to promote soil health and to protect waterways, because soil productivity measured by this index does not necessarily equal soil health, because soil productivity is really measuring its ability to produce yields, whereas soil health is an entire suite of services, ecosystem services, and that ability to support life. In addition, I should say, to the income capitalization approach, appraisers also use the sales comparison approach, where practitioners compare properties in a similar geographic area, and certain improvements on the land are factored in to determine which parcel is valued at what price. So those improvements, such as drainage, accessibility to the land, just improving farmability of the land, those are considered improvements and would factor into a higher value of land. Hopefully I didn't see. Great. So we know how land is valued. There are these two approaches, but then there's also a process that appraisers take. It's a standardized process. The first step being, of course, we need to determine the property boundaries of the parcel. The second step being, we want to identify the soil types on a parcel that will lead us to be able to, that leads appraisers to be able to measure soil productivity using that index. Then from there, where appraisers use the income capitalization approach to determine the price per acre. And then from there, finally, appraisers are able to use that comparable sales approach, factor in other improvements that they notice on the land, and finally come to some kind of assessment of value of that land. And this is what those first two steps would look like. This is from an actual appraisal, thanks to some of our partners in Michigan, in the land valuation industry. We see on the left side of your screen, this is a boundary map of a parcel being valued or being appraised rather. And then on the right, you can see that it's the same boundary, parcel boundaries, but they have overlain it with soil type data, essentially from the USDA. And this is factored in to their assessment of soil productivity. So appraisers using these steps are assessing soil productivity to determine the price per acre of land. And so what Delta has come to a recommendation, our current stages of work, again, with the help of this advisory group, our first kind of intervention into this process so that we can promote the adoption of conservation practices is the creation of a novel soil health index. And this would be using that standardized assessment criteria, those 3 soil health indicators that were developed by the Soil Health Institute. But these assessment criteria would also be standardized, certainly in Michigan, with ideally by our partners, either with at a university. Michigan State University has been a fantastic partner so far with us. But the bottom line here is that this new soil health index, parcels would be assessed using the same appraisal process as normal that appraisers are familiar with, but we would be just measuring soil health on a parcel, and that would be an additive indicator of the value of land. So we're not taking anything away. This is simply just an addition of an additional incentive for those that are adopting those conservation practices. And here's a bit of a visualization of what that might look like. So on the far left side of your screen, you can see the current appraisal steps that I already described. And then directly to the right of that is where our intervention would come in. And in bold and in that red box, you can see where the soil health index is applied. So again, this is measuring soil health of a parcel using those 3 indicators that we previously mentioned. On the far right side, you can see maybe an example of what it might look like on an appraisal for an appraiser to quantify given a score, an index that of the soil health indicators that were measured on that parcel. Our second intervention, our second and final intervention that we propose, is to intervene or to disrupt the comparable sales approach. So we would incorporate soil health conservation practices like cover crops, livestock integration, continuous living roots. We would consider those to be improvements on a parcel. And so when appraisers are comparing properties in a similar geography and looking at those different types of improvements, like improved drainage, as I mentioned, improved accessibility, even adding buildings that are of value to a parcel, we would consider the adoption of those soil health management systems to be an improvement that could then be additive to the value of land. And ultimately, to make this easier for appraisers, we would develop a tool that allows practitioners to be able to search up properties with similar adoption of these management practices in a similar geography to make it easy for them. And here, and you know what, sometimes it's a little, there we go. We see on the far left, to visualize this intervention, on the far left side of the screen here, we have our current appraisal steps, same as always, that we're familiar with. Then directly to the right, we see at the very bottom in that red box and in bold here, we see that once appraisers are ready to perform that comparable sales search and that approach, that they would then incorporate, well, does this, or they would factor in, does this farm, have they adopted certain soil health management systems? While the appraiser is there, they're able to document them, as you can see on the far right side of the screen, using this kind of template, sample template. And they would be able to quantify, or at least give a score to those improvements that could then be factored in to the final assessment of land. Of course, with all good plans, we have also identified several key barriers that need to be overcome. First and foremost is that there are no standardized adjustments. There's no quantifiable index for the adoption of these soil health management systems. So that obviously is a large factor that we are currently working with appraisers to try to overcome. Second, is that data collection efforts, especially in our project geography, have been met historically with pretty low response rates, which makes sense. This is a common phenomenon. Most farmers, landowners, land managers are frankly either too busy, frankly too busy often to be able to help us with data collection. So this is certainly a barrier that we would also have to overcome. Then finally, because soil health, even though it's becoming more and more a part of our public consciousness, relatively new in the landscape of especially agricultural real estate. So the data collection for measures of soil health in our project geography, as well as even the quantifying the costs and benefits of implementing these systems is also relatively low. So that's another constraint that we would have to overcome. With that, I'd like to hand it back to Josh.
Thanks, Lucas. Let's go back a slide here. Yeah, Lucas, as Lucas was describing, we have two methodologies, two interventions that we've developed, and our next steps here for the project are really refining those two interventions. We're going to be convening soil health scientists and appraisers together to bring them both up to capacity and to develop a methodology from those interventions. And then we're going to pilot them on 3 farms in Southeast Michigan. We want to do this pilot to see really if there is value to what we proposed as our interventions, if there need to be tweaks to them, better scoring systems, adapting it to really figure out in these methodologies if, like we believe, there's a true way to increase farmland value here. We're also planning on building capacity with Michigan appraisers. In our previous scopes of work, we've learned that appraisers, farmland appraisers in particular, might not be too familiar with soil health management systems and the costs associated with these improvements, with the improvements to soil. So we want to convene Michigan appraisers. We're going to be building a curriculum to really share with appraisers that's related directly to farmland value and the appraiser process for specifically soil health management systems. And then another thing that's crucial to this intervention as well as pilot is soil health testing. Appraisers, if this does become adopted at scale, are going to need to be able to conduct soil health tests on farms, whether the farmer has already done a soil health test to be able to provide to appraisers, or in the process of when appraisal is ordered to be able to conduct a soil health test in a timely fashion. So we want to research and discover all of what is going on with soil health testing in the state of Michigan, understanding where there's barriers and where there's opportunities for scaling soil health testing in Michigan. Because really, if we're improving, we're recommending soil health management systems as improvements, there needs to be a way to measure it and evaluate it, and soil health testing is the clear way to do so. I've got a couple more slides, but please feel free as we get closer to our questions and answers to drop your questions into chat or the Q&A section, and then we'll try to answer all of them that are there. In summary, the problem is at large, healthy soils do protect crucial waterways throughout the Great Lakes Basin. We want to improve soil. We believe this is a direct way to improve our waterways and improve our water systems. And to do so, we're trying to create an economic incentive for farmers to adopt soil health management systems that do improve soil. We've discovered there's a low adoption of on-farm conservation practices in Southeast Michigan and Michigan at large, directly relating to there's little financial incentive. And then we're linking soil health to land value. We believe it may promote adoption of conservation practices. If farmers know that these improvements will increase their land value and they want to be good stewards of their land, that this is a clear path to incentivizing it. And then in the current appraisal process, it prioritizes soil productivity versus soil health. And as Lucas was explaining, productivity is the yield of the crop that you're producing versus all of the others, which should still be accounted for by all means. as well as factored. However, we're saying we also need to include soil health in the land valuation process for the many ecosystem services that do create value, not just for the farmer, but for our communities and our waterways. We've developed 2 interventions so far to do so, the creation of a soil health index, and then also a soil health comparison. And as Lucas was saying earlier, the real good way to look at soil health comparison, a very easy example is drainage systems. If a farmer's incorporated drainage, this is accounted for and factored in the land valuation process. We know how much it costs to put in irrigation and drainage. So we need to really figure out how much it really costs to incorporate and do these soil health management systems, get that data and share it with appraisers so they understand the real value of, yes, it is an economic improvement, as well as provides all of the ecosystem services, and to see really with that, how to factor that into the land valuation process. So now we're up for some questions and answers. Please feel free to share in the chat. I'm going to scroll through the chat here to try to find some questions here. If you've got them, please enter them in. Q&A. This is critical for shaping. Janet says this is critical for shaping the message and understanding the barriers. Let's see. Asa Gold writes, do you have comprehensive soil quality data prior to the incentive implementation? Yes and no. Lucas, you can speak on this as well. We can get soil quality data prior to the incentive implementation if a farmer has those records available to us. This is not available to us necessarily. There are public databases as well as private databases of soil that you can pay for, that if a farmer has contributed that data or a transaction on soil productivity, a transaction has taken place, you can see what soil productivity is. There are soil productivity maps, but unless you actually have access to the farm and the farmer gives you permission for that data, you don't necessarily have it. Lucas, would you have anything else to add to that?
I think that about covers it. Yeah, that really is one of the constraints that we've identified and are familiar with, is that this data is somewhat scarce. And if these practices, these interventions are going to be adopted, then this is, we're looking at a timeline that is not necessarily relevant to someone who's trying to sell their farmland this summer. This is maybe something that takes a little bit of time. So yeah, thank you for that question.
Sure. Janet writes, can quantifying land value be tied to better insurance rate and access to finance? Janet, I would say yes. I'm going to let Bill answer this one too. Definitely, once we can pilot and show that there is an increase in land value and the farmer does have greater land value, that when the insurance companies look, as well as mortgage companies, when people try to take out loans or for mortgages on land, if it's worth more value, then there might be access to greater credit. We're piloting this right now, but I believe those are definitely next steps and next scopes of work in this project once we can analyze our data that we have. Bill, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, there's some really interesting work going on with financial products, with insurance, as well as there's in the chat as well as around carbon payments. I'll say that there has a pilot for farmers to get a reduced interest rate on operating loans if they are implementing conservation practices. I believe it's only like 1/4 or 0.5% difference, but that's can be a lot depending on the size of the loan. So there are things that are starting to get tied to it. Additionally, with right now in insurance in Iowa, Illinois, and I think starting in Ohio, you can get a reduction of your ag insurance premium by planting cover crops. It's a per acre kind of reduced rate for your insurance. So we're seeing that starting to scale up as well. And then additionally, there's a message here about carbon credits. To be perfectly honest, it's the wild, wild west with carbon credits right now, both for voluntary and non-voluntary markets. And a lot of corporations are setting up their own projects and programs. And there's a lot of different things that farmers are having to wade through. 2 things around that. Number one, the price for carbon in voluntary markets isn't really enough to be an incentive on its own for a farmer to really transition practices overall. And the other thing that we've heard goes back to the tax implications is a farmer would much more, we've heard from our farmers that we've surveyed that they'd much prefer tax credits to getting additional revenue payments for some of these things. So is there a way to tie this into a property tax credit so that you're not getting financially having implications for doing good transition work and actually building soil health and improving the value of your land potentially? So there's a lot of really interesting competing things that we're going to be looking at as we roll out the valuation and talk to farmers about what they prefer over the next year or two.
And Bill, I would just add one final thought to that, is that when we've interviewed farmers and we've gone through our previous stages of work, these programs, which are fantastic incentives, by the way, include not only carbon credits, but state programs like the Michigan Agricultural Environmental Assurance Program, as well as Strand. These are great programs, but we've identified that one of the major barriers for farmers is that the administrative capacity is just not there. And it's kind of a pain for them to engage in these programs where they have to do a lot of the certifying and administrative work themselves. So part of the goal here is also to take a lot of that burden off of the farmers, off of the land managers, and then have appraisers be able to take care of some of that work of verifying these benefits.
Great. Rosie asks, what is your estimated timeline for completing these farm studies, for rolling out the idea to appraisers? Estimated time frame for piloting would be next spring. We're going to be convening soil health scientists and appraisers in Michigan to make sure that the pilot and the interventions are directly aligned. We're going to be using those appraisers and doing pilot appraisers on farms. So we'll be recruiting 3 farmers. And then for soil health testing, the optimal time to do that, if the farmer hasn't already done farm testing to share with us for soil health testing, is in the spring, before you do any intervention on your land for planting, before really anything is taking place, for preparations for your next crop, to do a soil health test would be the most effective. So we're aiming for next spring. The curriculum will be building over the next year as well from those meetings with our appraisers and soil health scientists. We're going to be gaining that information from them as we develop a curriculum to be rolled out within the next year to 2 years of the project. Thanks for that question. And then Rosie, you had another question here. Conservation easements in Washtenaw County use sale comparisons 95% of the time. Sure, we're saying we're trying to disrupt their choice. Why don't appraisers use income-based now? And why would the factor of soil health convince appraisers to start doing so? So this is a really good question. I'm going to let Lucas answer this one as well, but I'm going to give a little of my thoughts here. Appraisers ultimately want as much information as possible before they give an appraisal assessment of the land, including what the improvements were, location, the soil type. We're saying currently they don't have information about soil health. And as soil health information becomes available to appraisers, it's just that other information they have to give the best and most accurate appraisal possible. There is no alternative motive for an appraiser. They want to give the most truthful appraised value of a property possible. So to do so, they need as much information as they possibly can gather within their allotted time frame to be able to deliver on those results. So we've heard from appraisers that this is really interesting information. Some of them know more, some know less. But as you can see from, if farmer A's soil is has a much greater soil health than farmer B, an appraiser is going to see that in a comparison, and they're going to say what steps were taken and what was the value of those improvements, potentially as one of the interventions that we have. What was the value of those improvements, and to incorporate that into a per acre price, as well as potentially just looking at the soil health test, seeing the 2 different numbers from one farm to the next, or creating an index that says the higher up you are, the greater value your land is, just as such as would be the productivity index. Lucas, do you have anything to add to that one?
Yeah, I think this is a really great question, Rosie. So thank you. And it's interesting because what you're saying is different than what we were hearing from appraisers. Not that, and I think that that's a good thing. Saying that in conservation easements, and especially in Washtenaw County, that the sales comparison approach is used far and away the most often, which yeah, something for us to look into. And it's certainly, we also have identified, if your question being, why don't they use income-based approach, the income capitalization approach now, and why would what we're doing incentivize that on the appraiser side? We have one of the kind of thoughts that keeps coming up, and especially as we've done a bit of market research, seeing that we have several kind of groups of landowners, and a gap between them in terms of their acreage and in their what crops they're growing and what management practices they're taking. These two groups, one being enormous farms that are mostly doing corn and beans, whereas we have also a lot, especially in Southeast Michigan, we have a lot of small, the majority of farm sizes that we that are in these 4 counties is relatively small. It's under 200 acres. So I'm curious if in Washtenaw, the conservation easement appraisals, the appraisers that are doing conservation easement there, if the group that maybe is more poised to be targeted by these interventions would be appraisers that are appraising larger farms that are not already adopting these conservation practices. So I wonder, yeah, if there's because of these two kind of emerging groups, if these are two different groups to target with different interventions. So I'm gonna look more into that. Thank you, Rosie.
Thanks, Lucas. David has a question here. Didn't or doesn't Michigan have an agriculture carbon sequestration program? Would this not provide the financial incentive mentioned that is missing from soil health management? Currently, carbon sequestration programs, there might be one offered or recommended by the state of Michigan, but it's kind of the Wild West, as most people would describe, of carbon sequestration programs. Bill, I'm going to let you answer some of this as well. And then the financial incentives are there, but we're not seeing really where the soil health improvement, you get gains in your carbon sequestration credits. Currently credits, like it's kind of a Wild West. There's a lot of people offering them. There's a lot of different models for tracking it, but I haven't seen out there that as your soil does improve and you have your carbon monitoring of your soil, that improved soil means that you're going to have a greater carbon credit. Now, this is something that essentially we're kind of clumping together in the land valuation process, that if we do know that carbon sequestration does gradually and slightly improve over a long period of time with soil health improvement systems, and we could potentially build 1 inch of organic matter over 10 years if we're doing optimal best management practices of soil health systems. This should be done, but then the carbon sequestration models, I definitely, they're there, but to increase value over time, I don't think we're there yet. And that's definitely something that should be incorporated and studied further. Bill, do you have something to add to that?
So the only other thing that I would add to that is that we're trying to look more comprehensively at the actual value of rebuilding soil health. Carbon sequestration is one part of the valuation of that. So with all the other benefits that are coming, are there ways to really create a holistic value around those practices that build soil health, that do help make that financial difference in the transition and the business planning that a farmer does? With adding in soil microbiology, you're actually producing better food, you're actually improving water as well. So what we want to make sure that we do is we don't devalue the work that farmers are doing by building soil health with these low prices that are currently out there on the carbon market. So it's one of those complicated things. How do we make it simple, but then how do we also comprehensively value it and find the right financial incentives and drivers to really make that beneficial to farmers across the Great Lakes and Midwest?
Thanks, Bill. Janet asks, is the number of less than 200 acre farms holding steady, or is there consolidation? If the latter, is it accelerating? Janet, that's a really good question. In some of the market research we've conducted, we are seeing that those 200-acre farms over time, with changes in demographics of age particularly, those farms are being consolidated into larger farms. It's less so that they're being passed from family to family today, and they're more so being passed from family to some sort of asset or institution. It's definitely a trend that's happening over the last 5 years. There's a lot that can be said about agriculture value in land, what's happened in the last 5 years to this. And I wouldn't necessarily say it's accelerating, but I believe it will be accelerating as our farmers are aging out, and their children or their family aren't interested or don't have the ability to take over the asset and to be that next generation of farmer. Lucas, do you have anything to add to that one?
Yeah, I would just add that and that our most reliable database of how large farms are in this area and who owns what comes from the USDA's Census of Agriculture, which is a really, really valuable tool. It comes out every 5 years, and we are due for the newest one this year in 2023. So we will certainly be updating our assessment of the landscape of acreage of farms and as soon as that data is available.
I'll just add really quickly, you'll see a report coming out from Delta probably in the next couple of weeks, where we looked at kind of 5-year trends of agriculture in Illinois. Michigan is a little bit different from the agricultural landscape, but we think that there are some trends that will be the same when we do that research for the state of Michigan. Really interesting things that we are seeing around consolidation, around how even what types of transactions are utilized for farm sales, and who's buying and why. So you'll see that coming soon. Just follow Delta on the socials, and we hope to look at those trends in Michigan as well.
Thanks, Bill. Tom asks, linking water quality improvements to changes in soil health is very difficult. It's very situationally, temporarily, and spatially variable. Is this appraisal process going to quantify the improvements to water quality, or is it just going to be qualitative? This is theoretically good. So Tom, we're working with soil health scientists, and there's 3 things that we're going to be measuring for soil health tests. We're not necessarily measuring water holding capacity. That has kind of been like rooted out as like consensus of soil health testing in a very more simple form to be able to use for the land valuation process. Now, in doing so, if the farmer A does have greater soil health than farmer B, you're going to be able to see that through the 3 recommended soil health tests that we are trying to do our interventions with. Now, with that, we would be able to say, from all of the other science and data that is out there from great soil health scientists that are doing the great work, that does increase water holding capacity, and it does do reduced erosion and reduced sediment getting into our water systems. Now, if that's an improvement in water quality, it's definitely harder to measure the chemical components of the water quality, but it is possible. Bill, do you want to add something to that?
No, I think that's exactly right. It's going to be hard to collect all of this data. I think continuing to work together to really figure out the best ways to quantify all of the environmental improvements that come through transition of agriculture will be really important moving forward. And it's going to become more critical. One of the things that we didn't really mention today is we are seeing a trend within consumers and within corporations to really understand those impacts and quantify them. And we really need to start getting our hands around ways to standardize that and further incentivize that data collection, but as well as then providing the tools to help farmers think about how to transition their practices if that's what they choose to do.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. I think also it's really important to as a takeaway that appraisers do want this information. They want this information. They think it is something that is very valuable for them and helping them in the appraisal process. And if this can become part of the land valuation process. It's not saying our interventions are set in stone and this is what it's going to be from now into the future. Technology and data has definitely come to farming like it hasn't before. There's big money coming into it. There's all sorts of tools and equipment that are being invented and piloted for soil health testing, instant rapid soil health testing on farms that do look at water quality, that does look at carbon sequestration, that all of a sudden your John Deere tractor is giving you the live data. I believe this is definitely coming. There's tons of money flooding into it. So we're a little bit ahead of the curve of maybe we don't have all the data available to really place value to all of these ecosystem services yet. It's too hard to collect it in a time frame for the appraiser, but that information is coming and appraisers are finding it very, very valuable. I give time for maybe one or two more questions here. Colin, if yield and income volatility is lower with improved soil health, increased water holding capacity, reduces yield shocks, for example, is that a way to incorporate the value of soil health into appraisal? Lucas, what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, it sounds like the question was if adopting these conservation practices, maybe early on you see a stagnation or whatever, or if it lowers your yields and yield is directly tied to the income capitalization approach, then what do we do about it? That is a fantastic question, and I think what I would say is that I would reiterate that these interventions, these proposed interventions, do not replace what is already set in the appraisal process of using a standardized soil productivity index, which does not involve testing soil. Soil productivity index that's used in Michigan and largely elsewhere is more a reflection of the underlying soil types, which would not be changing under conservation practices, as well as the slope of the area, a few other whatever crop is being grown there. So at least you wouldn't be losing, this would not be taking away any points from the soil productivity index. This would just be an additive, an additive factor. So even if yields are, maybe even if worst case scenario yields decrease after you adopt certain conservation practices, then at least the soil productivity index would not be affected by that. So, but that is a really great question and something that we will continue to look into with our appraisal advisory group.
Thanks.
Okay,
Lucas.
so I got to be honest, this Q&A session has been amazing. These questions are phenomenal, and there's no way we can get through them all. But please keep putting them in because we're going to record them and we're going to utilize them in our work moving forward. I want to thank everybody who added to the conversation today. And as I've plugged a couple times, you can follow up with us directly. We'll send this recording of this webinar as well as the slide deck out to folks who participated. Share it with your friends and family. Talk about soil health, with everybody you know. But we have a lot of resources on our website as well, which you can access at delta-institute.org/publication. And we look forward to talking to you all more about this. And we will incorporate a lot of these questions into our follow-up as well as into the work that we're doing in the future. And thank you so much for attending today.